A dropped socket started it. 8 pounds of steel, slipping off a wrench 70 feet above the floor of a missile silo in Arkansas. It fell into the gap between the work platform and the missile, and it did not stop falling until it hit something at the bottom. It bounced off a steel mount and punched a hole in the side of an intercontinental ballistic missile. What came out of that hole was rocket fuel, under pressure into a sealed concrete tube 9 stories deep. The missile was a Titan II. Standing on top of it, behind the nose cone, was a warhead of 9 megatons, the most powerful weapon the United States ever put on alert. 9 megatons is more explosive force than every bomb dropped by every country in the whole of the Second World War, 3 times over. It was sitting directly above a fuel tank that was now spraying. For the next 8.5 hours, the United States Air Force argued about what to do. Then the silo blew itself inside out and threw the warhead into a ditch beside a country road. This is the story of that night. How close a farming county in Arkansas came to a nuclear detonation, and how little of it had to do with the weapon itself. The Titan II was the largest missile the United States ever fielded. 103 feet tall, over 150 tons when fueled, buried upright in a concrete silo under an ordinary field. 54 of them stood on alert across Arkansas, Kansas, and Arizona, each one aimed at a target in the Soviet Union, each one able to fly in under a minute. That speed came from one design choice. Unlike newer rockets, the Titan II was kept permanently full of fuel. Nothing had to be loaded before launch, so nothing stood between the order and the flight. It was the missile's great advantage and its fatal flaw. The fuel was Aerozine 50. The oxidizer was nitrogen tetroxide. Put the two together and they ignite on contact. No spark, no ignition system, no delay. Both liquids are also violently toxic. A single lungful of oxidizer vapor can kill. The crews worked around them in sealed suits, the way other people work around live power lines, and for years nothing went wrong. By 1980, the fleet was 19 years old. Seals hardened and leaked. Spare parts came from companies that had stopped making them. Crews described the missiles as reliable and dangerous in the same sentence. The Air Force knew all of it. A 10-year design life had been stretched to 19, and the plan on paper was to keep these missiles standing in their silos well into the next decade. On the evening of the 18th of September, a propellant transfer team went down into Launch Complex 374-7 outside the town of Damascus to top off the oxidizer tank. It was routine work. The team had done it many times in sealed suits on a narrow platform beside the missile with a second stage at eye level and a 9-story drop on the other side of the rail. The job called for a torque wrench. The team was using a ratchet with a socket on the end. It was common practice in the field, and the manuals had recently stopped allowing it. The socket slipped off the ratchet. It went over the edge of the platform, into the gap between the platform and the missile, and fell 70 feet down the side of the rocket. At the bottom, it struck the thrust mount, bounced sideways, and drove into the skin of the first stage fuel tank. Aerozine 50 came out under pressure and turned into a spreading cloud of vapor. The airman on the platform looked down, saw the fuel coming out of the missile, and said out loud what everybody listening on the intercom already understood. The team climbed out. The control crew sealed the blast doors and evacuated the complex. Behind them, the silo was filling with fuel vapor, and the warhead was still bolted to the top of the missile. What happened over the next 8 hours was not a technical failure. The people closest to the missile understood the problem within minutes. None of them had the authority to fix it. The standard answer to a fuel leak was to vent the silo. Open the enormous door, run the exhaust fans, let the vapor out and bring the pressure down before the emptying tank crumpled under its own load. But opening the door meant exposing a loaded missile to the sky, and that decision belonged to Strategic Air Command Headquarters in Omaha, more than 1,000 miles away, on a telephone line in the middle of the night. So the hours went by. The fuel tank kept emptying and its pressure kept dropping, while the oxidizer tank sat above it, still full, still heavy, held up by a wall of thin metal that was slowly losing its strength. If that wall collapsed, the two stages would fall into each other, the fuel would meet the oxidizer, and the whole thing would ignite on contact. Everyone on the scene knew it. Nobody could authorize the fix. Outside the fence, the county sheriff was waking farmers and moving families off the land around the complex. Inside the fence, teams waited in the dark for an answer from Nebraska. Just after midnight, a team was ordered back into the complex to read the vapor concentration. 2 airmen went down, Sergeant Jeff Kennedy and Airman David Livingston, 21 years old. Their instruments went off the scale almost at once. The order came to get out. They started back up toward the surface, and at 3 in the morning, the fuel tank finally gave way. The two propellants met. The explosion tore the silo open from the inside and lifted the 740-ton concrete door off its rails, throwing it clear into the field. A fireball came up out of the ground and lit the countryside for miles. The blast threw Jeff Kennedy about 150 feet through the air and left him alive, with a broken leg. 21 people were injured that night. David Livingston was pulled out of the wreckage alive and died of his injuries hours later. He was the only person killed, and the complex was destroyed. And somewhere out in the dark, past the fence, past the wreckage of the launch complex, lay the piece of the missile that nobody on the radio wanted to name. The 9-megaton warhead had been blown clear of the silo by the explosion. Search teams found it a short walk from the complex gate, lying in a drainage ditch beside the road, intact. A nuclear warhead does not detonate because it is dropped, burned, or thrown across a field. Getting a nuclear yield is far harder than that, and the difficulty is the whole reason Arkansas is still standing. The plutonium core has to be crushed inward by conventional explosives arranged around it, and those explosives have to fire in near-perfect symmetry, within millionths of a second of each other. Anything less, and the weapon simply tears itself apart. One detonator early, one panel crushed by the blast, and you get scattered plutonium in a wrecked bomb, not a mushroom cloud. On top of that, the W-53 carried safety devices designed for exactly this kind of accident. They held. There was no detonation, and no radioactive release was reported at the scene. The Pentagon has a term for accidents involving nuclear weapons, broken arrow. It has officially admitted 32 of them, and Damascus is not the closest call on the list. In 1961, a bomber came apart over North Carolina and dropped 2 hydrogen bombs on a field near Goldsboro. On one of them, 3 of the 4 steps that arm a weapon had already completed. The pattern is remarkably consistent. The weapons themselves almost never fail. What fails is everything built around them: a checklist, a tool, a chain of command on a telephone line at night. Nobody was court-martialed for Damascus. The propellant team was named and blamed in public before the investigation had finished, and the 2 airmen who went back down into the silo were disciplined before they were decorated. The accident did what 19 years of leaking seals had not. The Air Force accelerated the retirement of the entire Titan II fleet, and the last missile came off alert in 1987. The silos were stripped, filled with rubble, and sealed. The complex outside Damascus is a circle of gravel and broken concrete in a field, with nothing on it to say what stood there. For several hours on that September night, the crews at the fence line did not know where the most powerful warhead in the American arsenal had landed or what condition it was in. The chain that got them there is sure enough to say in one breath. A socket, a fuel tank, a phone line to Omaha, 8.5 hours of waiting, and 9 megatons in a ditch. Every link in it was ordinary. That is what makes Damascus worth remembering. The weapon did its job, which was to do nothing. Everything built around the weapon did not. One dropped socket, 8 pounds of steel, and the largest warhead America ever built spent a night lying in an Arkansas ditch.